What's up, guys? Welcome back to another video. I am super excited to announce that the dyno tuning day is coming up. We're getting closer and closer to being able to get this thing tuned and to be able to drive this thing as hard as we want to drive it. But today's video, I really want to go over the top 5 things that you should have ready for your car to be dyno tuned properly. Number 5 would include tires. Make sure your tires aren't 10 years old and all rotted, because if your car makes anything over 300-400 horsepower and you have tires that are really old, it's probably going to spin on the dyno. It's going to be very hard for the tuner to properly tune your car if your tires are constantly spinning faster than the dyno and slipping, and put fresh tires on. Obviously, a charged battery. You're going to have the computer hooked up to your car for multiple hours without the car running also, so it's going to drain your battery really fast. Make sure the battery is charged to the max. Topped off fluids, no giant oil leaks. No tuner wants to tune a car that's puking out oil the whole time he's dynoing it. Vacuum leaks, make sure all your hoses on the engine aren't sucking in air. If it's idling super high, it's not idling properly. It's gonna be hard for them to tune it. Fresh spark plug wires, and make sure that the ignition system harness isn't rubbing on anything or there's any chafed wires, because this is a big part of what the tuner has to change in the computer of your car while he's tuning it, is the ignition system and the fuel, the two main things. So they really need the wires to all be intact, and make sure that everything is plugged in. Obviously, you don't want to have a misfire while they have it on the dyno. But yeah, fresh spark plugs, fresh spark plug wires. Make sure coils aren't dangling around, nothing over torqued or under torqued. Number 3, if you're going to the dyno and you have an engine light, get that fixed before you go to the dyno. Unless it is something simple like an evap or something that they can fix in the tune, you need to get it fixed, because assuming that your engine light is just going to be fixed in with the tune is not going to happen. But if you're going to the dyno and you have an engine light because there's a misfire or an issue with a sensor on the motor that was never resolved, then that is something that you should have fixed before you even set up a dyno tune day. The last thing you want to do when you go to get your car tuned is have an engine light and have a bad sensor or something, and you're wasting your tuner's time, you're wasting your own time. A dyno tuner doesn't just get an appointment set up for somebody and just plan on the tune taking like 20 minutes. It always takes multiple hours, even with the simple setup like this car has. This car, all I did was put a cam in it and an exhaust. That's it. And it's literally going to take them at least 2 or 3 hours just to tune this thing. So always make sure your engine light is on the dash, because it's something that they can tune out. Like I said, for example, a rear O2 sensor or an evap system that they can just tune out. And there's a bunch of other things. Mass airflow sensor could be one. A lot of people delete those off these cars when they do an intake system. So fix that engine light, please. You'll save yourself a lot of time and your tuner will be much happier with you. Number 2. Sometimes when the dyno tuner is done with your car on the dyno, they like to perfect the tune as far as the drivability goes, because they can't always perfect the drivability part of the tune on the dyno. They have to literally take it out on the street. So this one's pretty obvious, but very important. If they need to perfect the drivability of the tune of the car, they need to take it out on the road. So you need to make sure all the basic stuff that's pretty obvious, but people forget this part, or they don't really think of this part. You gotta have license and registration. You gotta have turn signals that work. You gotta have a headlight. You gotta have brake lights and hazards, a safe suspension system, a safe braking system, so they can properly and safely drive the car on the street, get it tuned while they're legally driving it on the road. Sometimes they need to perfect it to make sure it's perfect for the owner of the car, and not so much just horsepower, but they want to make it drivable. And last but not least, the most important one that I can assume that a tuner would want you to have for your to-do list for your dyno day would be to have at least a half a tank of fuel, fresh fuel that is, maybe a month or 2 at max. But I would assume, and I'm no professional here, I'm no tuner, I'm not gonna claim that I know how to tune a car at all. I kind of get the basics of how they do it and what they do to make your car perform. As a mechanic, I know how things work like that, but I am not a professional by any means. I've brought at least 2 or 3 of my projects in the past to having them tuned, and I have gotten a lot of info from the tuner as I have visited them. But fuel is probably one of the most important ones. Fresh fuel, at least a half a tank of fuel. You don't want to be on the dyno and your tuner says we're out of fuel. You should have put more than a quarter tank in. As they're driving it 100 some miles an hour on the dyno, the tuners complain about people not having fuel in it, or they'll have a car sitting for a year and they bring it to them. Even with a full tank, it's got old fuel in it. So now they're misfiring because the fuel's been sitting in there for a year. Fuel doesn't last forever, especially if you're a cheapo and you buy 87 for your car. That's a car like this. It doesn't like it. And just for reference, we only have 91 around here. In the car world, as far as aftermarket parts and stuff, 91 is crap. Like 91 is garbage. I wish we had at least 93 here for something like this, because I had a turbo Trans Am and I ended up blowing it up because I didn't do the fuel properly. I was literally using 91 octane with no methanol injection. I didn't switch to E85. I literally just did 91 octane with a turbo at like 11 PSI, and it didn't like that. It ran for a while and then it blew up because the fuel was just not on point. It was not a good setup. I should have ran with 93 at least with some meth and or E85. Make sure your fuel tank at least has half of fuel in it and it's pretty fresh for the most part. If you're going to bring your car to the dyno and you want to eventually just run 91 forever, make sure there's 91 in the tank. Your tuner is going to tune your car to whatever fuel you have in the tank at that appointment. If your tank has 91 in it and you go get it tuned, he's gonna tune it on the 91 fuel that is in the tank at that time. So after you get it back and you bring it home and you start driving it and you run out of fuel and you start putting 87 in it, well now the computer doesn't know what's going on. It's gonna start taking power out of it. At least to us car guys, we know 87 is absolutely garbage for vehicles like this. Don't ever do that. Don't put 87 in your vehicle that you're gonna run 400 or 500, 600 horsepower plus. It's really not good for it. That is my top 5 list of things that I know personally in my life that you should have prepared for your car before you take your car to the dyno. Another honorable mention would be obviously have enough money to pay the tuner. If the tuner says it's gonna cost $750 for your dyno tune, you're an idiot if you're only bringing $750 to the dyno tune. Always be prepared for something to go wrong. Dyno tuning is very expensive. Respect the tuner you have in your area. Research on where you want to take your car. I'm taking my car about 2 hours away because I know of a high-end tuner that tunes all kinds of cars. Whereas I could probably find a guy who could tune a cammed LS within an hour radius here, but I'm not gonna trust that. I'm gonna take my time, do it right, bring it to someone who's done my cars in the past. He's very good at it. So obviously the basics. Make sure your car is drivable on the street. Make sure all the license, registrations, everything's up to date. Make sure you got brake lights, tail lights, blinkers, legal stuff. Make sure your fuel is at least half full with the proper fuel in it, fresh fuel. Make sure your spark plugs are all new. Not a crazy amount of leaks. You know, some tuners are really picky. They don't want a single drop of fluid coming out of anywhere of the car. And there's other tuners that really don't mind if you have a little bit of an oil leak, as long as it's not gushing all over their floor and on their dyno. Some of them really don't care. And of course, make sure you have money to do this. This is not a cheap hobby, and anyone who's in this hobby should know it's a very expensive hobby. It's very fun, but it's very expensive. So be prepared when you go to the dyno. Respect your tuner because they're a rare breed and they really know what they're doing. Hats off to all of them. I hope aftermarket parts and fast cars are going to be around as long as I am on this planet, I hope. If you have a project, guys, look forward to doing all this checklist before you take your car to the dyno. It's a lot of work, but it's very fun in the end. And just always be prepared with something like this because it's a big responsibility. A little story on my first project I ever brought to a tuner. I had an 02 Ws6 Trans Am. It had the LS1 in it. It had a small cam in it and it had truck heads on it because they flow a little better than the factory LS1 heads. And what I did to it was I did a heads cam build on it. And I remember driving it all the way to Cedar Rapids. It was like a 3-hour trip. And I brought a buddy with me and we were just cruising all the way there, taking it easy, making sure we didn't romp on it and hurt anything on the way to the dyno. This is before I had another car. I was like 24 maybe, it was a while ago. And I drove it all the way to Cedar Rapids, and he was a tuner at a school, and he was a really good tuner. He was really cool. And so we brought it into the school and he tuned it, and I think it made like 398, 399, something like that. It was a very small cam and an LS1. It was a 6-speed, and it had 799 heads off of a Silverado, and long tubes with a straight pipe exhaust. It made $399, just under 400, and it felt awesome. Drove it back home, and within a week, I was ready to do forced induction on it. So I bought a turbo kit, didn't change anything in the motor. And this was before I was knowledgeable about this whole fuel thing and how important high octane fuel is, especially to boosted cars, whether it's a turbo, supercharged, whatever. So I bought this turbo kit, put it on my Trans Am, and I brought it to this place that I'm gonna be bringing this to, and I ran out of fuel. I had a Racetronics 255 fuel pump in the tank, which supposedly, according to the internet, was good for 600 horsepower, and my car was definitely not gonna make 600 horsepower with that turbo. I think he got it up to almost 500 horsepower and it ran out of fuel. So we took the whole day to go up there and get it tuned, and it wasn't even finished. The tuner told me, he said, you got two options. The spring and the wastegate on this turbo system is reading about 11 pounds of boost. So you have two options. You can take your car home, put a smaller spring in it, bring it back, and it'll probably read about 6 or 7 PSI, and it'll probably make about 480 to 500 horsepower on the dyno, and you'll be good. But if you're gonna keep this 11-pound spring in the wastegate and you wanna make 11 pounds, you need to take this home and put a bigger fuel pump in it. So me, being a 23, 24-year-old, was thinking, okay, I have the option of just putting in a smaller spring and making 480 horsepower, roughly. Or I could put a bigger fuel pump in there and leave the 11-pound spring in there, so I make 11 pounds of boost and make over 500. At that age, of course, you're gonna go with the bigger power. So I put a bigger fuel pump in. I think I put an Aeromotive 340 in the pump. Left the spring in there. I think we scheduled another dyno day a month later, maybe 2 months later. Got it tuned. I had the exhaust coming out the hood. It was just an On3 CX Racing kit back in the day. You could get a kit for like 1,600 bucks. Then you got to buy the wastegate and blow off valve and whatever. But it was a really cheap kit for like $2,000. So I got it dynoed. I have the dyno sheet right here. It made 544 and 576 torque. I'm not sure how accurate that is. It seems really high, but maybe it didn't make that much. But yeah, almost 550 horsepower. And it lasted maybe a week because I took it home, I drove it the next day, and it was super fun. I didn't have a catch can on that system. I literally just had the filter that plugs into where your oil cap is, and I saw some steam coming out of that, and I just knew at that point the motor was about to just quit on me. And so I brought it home. I knew the motor was bad, pulled the motor out of it, ended up finding out that the piston ringland was inside of one of the cylinders. I can't remember which cylinder it was. I have the video to that too, I'll try to find. Ended up finding a 5.3 Gen 4 block from a guy in Des Moines. He was probably 3-4 hours south of me. So I went down there, picked that motor up, put the motor in there, and after all that, I was almost ready to get set up for a third dyno day. Something came up and I had to sell the car because I was just tired of it. I wanted something different. Although I love the 4th gen Trans Am Camaro bodies and working on those, I needed something different. I wanted to start fresh. This Trans Am I had 200,000 miles on. No, it had 212,000 miles on it. It had the factory 10-bolt rear. It had the factory T56. It was literally just a head cam LS1 with it had a Spec 3 clutch, aftermarket clutch. It was good for like 900 torque, something like that. It was pretty clapped out, if you want to call a high mileage, pretty factory F-body clapped out. All it had was a decent motor setup with a cheap turbo kit on it. Other than that, it was on some lowering springs, and that's it. Nothing else was done to it. And it made 544 to the wheel, and that's when and then it blew up. I put the 5.3 in it. Never got it tuned again. I sold it, and then I just finally learned that I should have went with a smaller spring. It would have lasted a lot longer, or I should have went with some kind of methanol injection to help cool down the fuel at higher boost levels like that. But either way, we all know LS motors can take way more than a 550 horsepower, whatever I made. I just had the lack of knowledge when it came to proper fueling to boost. I've learned a lot since then. I've learned I blew up a motor, ended up selling the car. I went with a regular cab short bed project after that, ended up selling that and getting a base model C6, and it's all history from there. But this was a very good day at Excessive Autosports up in Sioux Falls. The next dyno video that I'll be making will be of this car at that same shop. And if I had to guess, 91 octane in this, of course, just pointing that out, 91 octane. All that's done to this car is a cam with an exhaust system. The heads there's nothing done to the heads. They're just fixed because these cars had bad heads from factory. At least most of them seem to have had some issues to where the valves could drop into the motor. And so I sent the heads off, got that fixed. They did nothing performance-wise to the heads. They just got it fixed, sent them back to me. I put them on. It'll probably make about 520, I'm guessing, maybe. It's gonna be a lot. It's a lot lighter car than that Trans Am I had. So it's going to feel a lot faster than the Trans Am I had, but that was a fun. I'll try to find videos on that. That was a very fun car. I loved that car. If I could find another cheap Camaro or Trans Am roller like the one I had before for a project this winter, that'd be perfect, because I can find an LS motor somewhere on Marketplace, swap it in there, maybe do a turbo kit build for this winter. That would be like the perfect build that I would want to do as a series on the channel. Would get another F-body in here with an LS turbo. That would just be perfect. Right down my alley. They're pretty cheap for the most part. If you can find a roller and an engine harness with a computer and a motor and all that. But all in all, if you really wanted to know exactly what your tuner wants you to have your car spec'd for before you take your car to them to get it tuned, just ask them. They'll say, do this, 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 check this, this, this. Make sure you have enough money and fuel. That's basically it. Other than that, guys, thanks for watching. Take care. I'll see you in the next video.